Support for this episode of I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere is made possible by the Wessex Press, the premier publisher of books about Sherlock Holmes and his world. Find them online at wessexpress.com. And the Baker Street Journal, the leading publication of Sherlockian scholarship since 1946. Subscribe today at bakerstreetjournal.com.
I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere, episode 142, The Criminal Mastermind of Baker Street.
I hear of Sherlock everywhere since you became a chronicler.
In a world where it's always 1895, comes I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere, a podcast for devotees of Mr. Sherlock Holmes, the world's first unofficial consulting detective.
I've heard of you before. You're Holmes the meddler, Holmes the busybody, Holmes the Scotland Yard Jack in office.
The game's afoot as we discuss goings-on in the world of Sherlock Holmes enthusiasts, the Baker Street irregulars, and popular culture related to the great detective.
As we go to press, sensational developments have been reported.
So join your hosts, Scott Monty and Burt Wolder, as they talk about what's new in the world of Sherlock Holmes.
You couldn't have come at a better time!
And hello once again. Welcome to I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere, the first podcast for Sherlock Holmes devotees where it's always 1895. I'm Scott Monty.
You are indeed Scott Monty, and I'm Burt Wolder.
And I have to tell you, Burt, April is an exciting month for a lot of reasons. You know, there are Sherlockian society meetings. Spring, rumor has it, is somewhere around the next 5 corners. There are birthdays. I think you have a birthday coming up, if I'm not mistaken.
You have a birthday coming up.
I do.
You do?
Oh, shh, don't tell anyone. And it's just an exciting time, you know. The light is here once again, thanks to daylight saving time, albeit at different parts of the clock now. But it's, I don't know, spring has that kind of effect on me.
Well, and down through the ages, you know, it's coded into our DNA. It's why our ancestors, those happy medieval people over there in the ancient Anglo-Saxon kingdom of Wessex still have their pagan rituals. And you know what is, and there's a link there too, isn't there, between Easter and Eostra? What was her name? The old pagan goddess of something or other. So yes, it's the rebirth. It's the time when you start to begin to look forward to the idea of growth and a harvest. And when some of us sit around looking at the return of the bills from the people who cut the lawns and wonder why it's so high and where all the clippings are going and why the aspidistra doesn't look healthier and who trimmed the arbovita so badly on one side and what those kids are doing on the lawn.
Oh, those kids, I know. Well, I thought of the name. It is associated with Easter, and it's the killer rabbit of Kyle Bannog. Must be it.
Big pointy teeth.
Yes, and the holy hand grenade.
O Lord, bless this thy hand grenade, that with it thou mayst blow thine enemies to tiny bits in thy mercy.
Well, We do want to get to our friends at Wessex Press just shortly, but before we do, just a reminder, you can reach out to us on ihearofsherlock.com. That's our website. The show notes for this episode are available at ihose.co/ihose142, ihose.co/ihose142, all lowercase. You can email us, you can tweet us, you can hit us up on Facebook, on Instagram. It's all available in the contact center there on the show notes. The other thing that we want you to remember is that if you can help us get to a certain level via Patreon or PayPal, we would like to start providing transcripts of these shows. And we are very close We are very close to doing that. So if you have it in your heart to support the show on any kind of regular basis or irregular basis, Patreon or PayPal, both of those work. Check out the orange button or the Donate Now button on our website. It would really help us out. And now we'd like you to help out our friends at Wessex Press.
It's an April of celebration in the ancient Anglo-Saxon kingdom of Wessex, when we mark Hocktide, rejoicing in the death of Hardicanute and the accession of Edward the Confessor in 1042. It seems like only yesterday. Like us, you appreciate the past. You still hunger for the details behind Jeremy Brett's famous Sherlock Holmes television series from the 1980s. That's why you are captivated by a rare recording of creator and producer Michael Cox telling the inside story of these remarkable shows. This Study in Celluloid audio CD is available right now from our WessexPress.com. Clocks fuss along, the lackeys of a spring, slaves of escapement. They chime, but never sing. Step out of time for a while by reaching for the pleasure only a volume from the Wessex Press can provide. Choose yours today.
So, pagan rituals galore. I mean, this is the time, you know?
Yeah.
We used to have a collection of stones that were laid in a certain way that formed a fountain out in front of the College of Communication at Boston University. And we used to call it Stonehenge Prime, the first derivative of Stonehenge. Always fun.
Did it have some wonderful mechanical significance? Was there a day when, there's also always a wonderful day in New York. Maybe it happens more than just once a year, but there's a lovely day when the sun is setting, and through one of the big avenues, it may be 57th Street, you can see all the way from the East River over to the Hudson as the sun sets.
Yeah. Or the morning on a certain time when the sun just shines straight up 6th Avenue. Yeah. No, the statue at Boston University did not have any kind of significance like that, although I will say that there were certain evenings as finals were approaching and we were pulling all-nighters studying for our test, we would head down to the fountain with the Mission Impossible theme song playing on our mini tape recorders, and we would dump a whole bottle of Tide laundry solution into the fountain, and it would foam over by the next morning. So that was always fun.
Well, now the campus police knows where to find you now.
Well, there's a statute of limitations. See, this was before the days kids ate Tide Pods. We actually poured laundry solution into water. That's you kids these days, and your
like
fancy Tide Pods.
Yeah.
Crazy. Well, speaking of kids today, he's not exactly a kid. He's a little younger than us. We want to talk to our guest, Rob Nunn. Rob is the author of The Criminal Mastermind of Baker Street, and he shares some really interesting, though elementary, thoughts. No, they're not. They're nothing like elementary, but he shares his thoughts at the Sherlockian blog, Interesting Though Elementary. And he lives in Edwardsville, Illinois, with his wife and daughter, where he teaches the 5th grade. And every November, Rob actually makes it a point in his classroom to teach his students all about Sherlock Holmes. You're going to hear that his first engagements with Sherlock Holmes came at a rather young age, but as Rob has eased himself into the Sherlockian world, he has taken on a lot of activity. He has written for I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere. He is the head of a Sherlockian society in St. Louis. He's even involved with the Beacon Society. We can't even do this justice, so we're going to let Rob tell the complete story. Rob, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. It's been I would say lifelong dream, but let's go with a 10-year dream to be on the show.
You've had a short and disappointing life, if that's been your lifelong dream. I hate to tell you. Well, it's a pleasure to have you on. And like we do with all of our guests, let's start at the very beginning of your Sherlockian journey. And how about you tell us about your first meeting with Sherlock Holmes?
My first meeting with Sherlock Holmes probably came back from Sesame Street with good old Sherlock Hemlock and the greatest Sherlock Holmes movie of all time, The Great Mouse Detective, back in the 80s. I grew up with, I mean, he was just a constant figure. You knew when you saw the magnifying glass and the deerstalker that you're dealing with a detective. And in fact, I don't know why or how it ended up that way, but Michael Harrison's book, The Revenge of the Hound, was in a Scholastic book order when I was in 6th grade. And I'm almost certain that was my first Sherlock Holmes book. And a few years ago, I actually found it in my mom's basement, which was nice to come across. But I kind of drifted away from
Michael Harrison or the book?
Oh, yeah, no, the book. I don't think he would have lasted very long down there. Lots of empty boxes and unused weight benches. But then I got the complete canon for Christmas in 2003 and just tore through it. And that was right around the time that the Robert Downey Jr. movies came out, I think. And I've been an avid reader of Sherlock Holmes ever since.
Wow. So, well, first of all, I think it's wonderful that these childhood influences were there. Sherlock Hemlock and The Great Mouse Detective. And interestingly enough, I just this evening, I came across a picture of Elizabeth Tower, which of course everyone knows as Big Ben.
Oh yeah.
It's undergoing some extensive renovations recently, so cleaning and whatnot. And both of the hands have been taken off of the face of the clock. And I thought, wow. The Great Mouse Detective has actually come true.
Yeah, I wonder if Radigan's cape is still stuck to the corner of that one hand.
That's why they had to clean it, I guess.
There you go.
So did you read The Grace, in addition to seeing the picture, did you actually read Basil of Baker Street?
I came back to it years and years, just probably about 5 years ago, when I really started getting into a lot of the stuff outside of the canon. I realized that it was based off books, and since then, I've read the books, but not when I was a kid.
So when did your run-in with Sherlockians first happen? I mean, you kind of backed your way into the stories coming from the children's influences, and then, of course, a pastiche with Michael Harrison, eventually working your way to the canon. How did you run into these interesting people that we know?
Well, coincidentally enough, I wrote an article about this for Here Sherlock back in 2015. The month after my first Science Society meeting, I came out and said, "Hey, would you tolerate me writing an article?" And you guys were kind enough to let me do that. But in the fall of 2015, I had been connecting with Sherlockians through Twitter quite a bit, and I'd finally decided, okay, I'm going to come out of my shell a little bit and go out and meet some people in real life, and drove about an hour to St. Charles, Missouri to meet with the Harpooners of the Sea Unicorn Scion Society over there. And it was a great meeting. And ever since then, if I go about 6 or 8 weeks without seeing other Sherlockians, I start to get a little antsy and got to find a meeting or a fix somewhere.
I like that. That's not a bad addiction to have.
No, it's much better than other things I could be addicted to. Although it's not necessarily cheaper than some addictions.
Well, that's true. You know, depending on which area you want to pursue in the Sherlockian world. Evansville, Illinois. Tell us about that. Are there Sherlockian societies anywhere closer than an hour's drive to you?
No. So Edwardsville is where I live now. So we are about 20 minutes from St. Louis, and that is where all the major Sherlockian activity is. Although there's a handful of Sherlockians I've met that live over in Illinois, we kind of congregate in St. Louis for a central meeting spot. St. Louis actually has 4 active science societies there.
Really?
There's the Harpooners of the Sea Unicorn, which are in St. Charles, Missouri, which is one of the suburbs just outside of St. Louis. There is a small group, the Jefferson Hopes, who meet in people's houses. There's I want to say about 6 or 8 people in that group. There is the Noble Bachelors of St. Louis that have an annual dinner every year, and usually a horse race over the summer. And then my main scion is the Parallel Case of St. Louis that I am the head of, and we meet every other month at one of the library branches in St. Louis. So there's plenty of us here.
Wow. And where's the name come from, the Parallel Case of St. Louis?
That came from a study in Scarlet, where Holmes was talking about a parallel case in St. Louis and Riga.
Oh, right. Oh, that's very clever. I've never heard that name before of a Scion Society.
Yeah, it's been around, I think this year might actually be our 30th anniversary.
Wow.
Oh, wow.
So that's...
and some of the original...
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, and some of the original members are, still trekking to our meetings on a regular basis. So,
is that the group that Joe Eckrich founded?
Yep, that is Joe's group, and he is still right there in the mix of it. But he didn't want to be in charge of running the discussion. So, as soon as he knew that he could sucker me into it, he passed it off as quick as he could.
Yeah, that's a smart guy right there. Ha!
Joe is a smart guy. I'll give him credit for that.
Now, at one point, it was early on in my own Sherlockian journey. I want to say the late 80s, early 90s. I had a short correspondence with the then editor of the Baker Street Journal, one Mr. Philip Schreffler, who lived down in St. Louis. Yeah. Is his name still bandied about?
He still comes up. I mean, he is a pillar of Sherlockian society, but he's not in the St. Louis area anymore.
I see. Yeah, he's up in Connecticut now. So, I seem to remember that either the Jefferson Hopes or, the Noble Bachelors maybe associated with him. So, that's Philip's investiture, Jefferson Hope. Oh, of course. Well, that makes total sense then.
Well, there you go.
So tell us a little bit. This is fascinating. There are 4 scions in St. Louis, almost as many as there are good barbecue restaurants in St. Louis, it seems.
Oh, I think St. Louis could do more than 4.
Well, yeah. I agree. It's just there's a proliferation of Sherlockian societies there. So how do each of these discern themselves from one another? How do you see them as being different?
So the Noble Bachelors is kind of the one. They just meet once a year, and they have one big event a year. It's not a story discussion group. It's just getting all of the Sherlockians in the area together, and they usually have a canonical speaker who is the speaker doesn't necessarily get up and speak on a story, but they speak about things related to it. In the past couple years, they've had somebody get up and talk about Victorian medical practices. Last year was a talk about Jack the Ripper. This year, because St. Louis has just dedicated a Sherlockian research collection, the Noble Bachelor speaker was about curating a collection on research items. So that's the Noble Bachelors. And like I said, the Jefferson Hopes is a smaller, more intimate group. They're still very friendly to everybody. It's just they prefer to meet people's houses. The Parallel Case of St. Louis, we are kind of the St. Louis group. We meet every other month as a discussion group on the story of the month. And the Harpooners are just further west for people that don't want to drive into the city, and they meet every month. Huh.
Well, it's some active community. So tell us a little more about this research collection you just mentioned.
So, just in February, one of the members of the Adventresses of Sherlock Holmes, Mary Schrader, she had a small research collection at McKendree University over a small town in Illinois where she was a professor. And then she had, as professors do, she left there and then retired and kind of forgot about it, and it sat there for probably about 20 years just collecting dust. And it was a collection of different magazines and books and pastiches and scholarly writings and all of that, as well as a few pieces of art. And a few of us got together and decided we wanted to kind of get it back together. And Mary found a the rare book and manuscripts room at the St. Louis Public Library, and they said they would be happy to take it. And in the meantime, Bill Cochran, who is a member of the BSI and lives down in Southern Illinois, heard about it, and he donated quite a few boxes of material to donate to the collection. And I only know that because I'm the one that had to move all of Bill's boxes that he was donating. But it was worth it because now in that collection, thanks to Bill, we have a complete run of the Baker Street Journal in the library collection in St. Louis.
Wow.
So at the last Noble Bachelors meeting in February, it was the dedication of that collection. And what they're hoping is to have a really good place for people to go and physically hold research items. I mean, we're not going to be pulling a Beaton's Christmas Annual there anytime soon, but a lot of good resources to sit and read and see what other people have said about the stories in the canon.
Wow, that's impressive. So, obviously, a research collection, a lot of scholarly works there. Are there any particular items of interest that stand out to you as a new-ish Sherlockian?
They have the Ronald DeWall, the huge, the universal Sherlock Holmes, which you couldn't read in a week if you tried. There's that. They also had out, and I wish I could remember the name of the actual story, but it is one of those miniature books, but it comes with a magnifying glass because you have to hold a miniature magnifying glass to read the text on the page, and it's one of the canonical stories. I thought that was really fun to look at too.
Oh, that's fun. That's fun. It sounds like the Queen Mary's Dollhouse version of what was that? How Watson learned the trick.
Something very close to that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's interesting. Well, so okay. Well, as long as we're talking about the groups there, let's venture off into something that I think is being sponsored, particularly by the Parallel Case of St. Louis. And that is their third Sherlockian symposium, called Holmes in the Heartland. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that? Yeah. And maybe about the history of the, Parallel Case, events.
So back in the 90s, before I became a Sherlockian myself, the St. Louis area Sherlockians had a couple different Holmes related weekends, Holmes on the Arch and the Games Afloat. Because it was on the river. And from all accounts, they were really well received, a lot of fun. But as things do, they just kind of fell by the wayside. And we thought with this collection, why not invite some Sherlockians from the Midwest or even around the country to come see the beginnings of what we're trying to do here. So we are hosting a Holmes in the Heartland weekend on August 10th through 12th. And what we're hoping is it'll be our first annual one. We'll have an annual Holmes in the Heartland every year. But with that weekend, it's going to be a day full of Sherlockiana on Saturday, but we also want to kind of highlight the city that it's in. So we're going to have blues, barbecue, tea, history, all kinds of other things throughout the weekend with that.
Wow. That's impressive. So, any particular names that folks might recognize who are speaking at the event?
We've got a really impressive lineup of speakers. Like I said, the founders of the collection, Mary Schrader and Bill Cochran, are both going to give short speeches to talk about their involvement with the specific collection there that's going to be on display for people to see. But since the weekend is going to be around the St. Louis Sherlockian collection, we've decided to have the theme for this Holmes in the Heartland to be a curious collection. So we've lined up some other speakers and just kind of said we would like you to give a talk or presentation under the theme of curious collection. Our keynote speaker for that is Tim Johnson from the Sherlock Holmes collections at the University of Minnesota.
Wow.
I think he's definitely going to know what he's talking about when it comes to library collections there. We've got a handful of other BSI members other than Bill Cochran. Bill Mason's coming up from Nashville, Brad Kiefhofer from Peoria, and Don Hobbs is trekking up from Texas. I'm sure all of them are going to have their own spin on that theme. And then we also have a newer Sherlockian, Tassie Hayden, who was a former co-host of the Three Patch podcast. She lives in St. Louis and is a member of the Parallel Case, and she's going to be giving a speech. And then we have a local fighting group called the Black Knights Fighting Group. They're going to be displaying Baritsu and recreating fighting styles of Victorian London. And then we have one other surprise guest speaker that's going to hopefully link the St. Louis and the Sherlock Holmes worlds together, but we're going to leave that as a surprise for the people that attend.
Ah, smart. I like that. Well, that's a heck of a program.
We are really impressed with the people that have signed on, we don't have a track record of this. It was just a bunch of people sitting around a conference table after a Parallel Case meeting. We said, we ought to have a weekend for this. And within a couple months, kind of put all this together. And that's just Saturday's event.
Wow. Now, in terms of showcasing the city of St. Louis, obviously, home of blues music, barbecue, is there anything that an Anglophile would find of interest in St. Louis?
Well, so like I said, Saturday's going to be all about Sherlock Holmes. But we've kind of bookended the weekend with some St. Louis events. Friday night, we're calling it our Welcome to St. Louis 221 BBQ and Blues Carbuncle Night. That is, we're going to have a tour of the National Blues Museum, which is opened in St. Louis just about a year ago. And then dinner right next door at Sugar Fire Smokehouse, one of St. Louis's top barbecue restaurants. And then after everything on Saturday, on Sunday, for anybody that can stick around, we are going to have a tour of the Becker Medical Museum on the campus of Washington University, and they're going to have Victorian-era medical implements and medicine. And then after that, we'll have an afternoon tea at the nearby London Tea Room to kind of wrap it all up.
Oh, that's perfect. Wow. So how can folks find out about this event if they're interested in attending in August?
So registration does not open for that until May, but a quick Google search of the phrase Homes in the Heartland will take one of your top results would be that. You can also follow the Parallel Case on Facebook. It's just the Parallel Case of St. Louis. On Twitter, we are Parallel Case STL. We also have a blog, parallelogramstl.blogspot.com. All of that will keep you in the know about Homes in the Heartland and when registration opens.
Excellent. Well, we will put links to all of those in the show notes for this episode, which, by the way, just as a reminder, are available at ihose.co/ihose142. All lowercase, ihose.co/ihose142. We're going to take a quick break here, hear from one of our sponsors, but when we come back, we'll be talking with Rob about something very near and dear to his heart. So stay with us. With a new season comes a new Baker Street Journal. The BSJ is produced 4 times a year, plus a bonus Christmas annual that's only available to subscribers. Each volume consists of a spring, summer, autumn, and winter number, meaning that you'll receive a wealth of Sherlockian scholarship year-round in your mailbox. Each issue will always contain a pithy and insightful editor's gaslamp, a cartoon by Scott Bond, cataloging of Sherlockian publications received, and much more. Add to that the variety of papers and ideas from Sherlockians, new and old, from around the world, and you've got yourself a must-read for your bedside table. Now, you may think it's all been done before. There's nothing new under the sun, as Sherlock Holmes said. But when one reads the canon the first time, it's really a matter of enjoying the stories for the adventures they bring. A second and third time allow one to appreciate the decades-long friendship that was cultivated between Holmes and Watson. And even more readings allow life to seep in and provide even more perspectives that hadn't been there in one's youth. And so the scholarship in the BSJ continues with endless considerations from Sherlockians of all ages. After reading their articles, you'll never read the Sherlock Holmes stories the same way again. See what you might be missing at bakerstreetjournal.com today.
So, Rob, when we kicked off and framed up this episode, one of the titles that is very close to you is The Criminal Mastermind of Baker Street. What was it at what point did you take your Sherlockian enthusiasm and decide now was the time to put words on paper?
Like I said earlier, I've been lucky enough to write for I Hear of Sherlock for over a year at the point that this idea popped into my head. And I thought, as a Sherlockian, someday I'm going to write a book, maybe even a couple if it turns out I'm good at it. And one day I was sitting around reading the Greek Interpreter, and there's the line from Gregson when Holmes comes back and he says, "I've got a window open. We can go in that way." And Gregson says something along the lines of, "It's a mercy that you're on the side of the force and not against us," or something like that. And, just a regular commonplace line that I've read over and over again, all of a sudden made me stop. And I thought, well, yeah, how would that have looked if Holmes wasn't one of the good guys? And that the more I thought about it, the more interesting it got. So I went back through and reread the whole canon and thought, how would this story be different? How would this go? Would Holmes work with the cops on this? Would he be behind the crime? And what I did was I just tried to go through the entire canon and rewrite a biography of Holmes and Watson and their friendship. But instead of being detectives solving crime, they are the head of a secret criminal mastermind, a criminal empire, all behind London.
So in your other reading, have you ever read any of the Raffles story? Did you find yourself going in that direction, or this sounds like it's more like a parallel universe kind of a treatment?
It's very much a parallel universe, and a few people that have asked me about it, they said, "Now you're not saying that this is an actual true story?" And I said, "No, this is what I refer to it as. It's not necessarily pastiche. It's a alternative biography. If Holmes had decided after the Musgrave Ritual case that he didn't get anything, but everybody else walked away with crown jewels and all the glory, and he wasn't even mentioned in the write-up in the newspaper. If he had decided, well, I'm smarter than anybody else, why shouldn't I be compensated for this stuff? So I have just really tried to retell that whole story with keeping it. I've tried to make everything else, 99% of the book, canonical, except for the fact that Sherlock Holmes isn't a detective, which kind of is a sticking point.
And so, have you come across Mycroft in this parallel universe yet?
Mycroft is, yeah, they are all there. Mycroft, Moriarty, Gregson, Lestrade, everybody. In my universe, Mycroft tolerates it, mostly because he doesn't have the energy to deal with it. But he also knows that having a brother as smart as Sherlock and with the skills that Sherlock does could be useful to the government. And we see Mycroft uses Sherlock very similarly to how he does in the canonical stories. And I didn't want to make him a main character or, one of the real, in some pastiches, Mycroft Holmes is just as active as Sherlock, and that's not who Doyle created. So I tried to, he's a minor character, but he still behaves mostly the same.
I think there was an excerpt there where Sherlock Holmes used the solicitor John Hector McFarlane to pay £130,000 to Irene Adler to keep her quiet. No? Too soon? So I love this idea, Rob, where you're reading, probably rereading at that point, a story, and it suddenly hits you, like just a flash, and you're inspired. And I would imagine that some of the writing just kind of flowed from the pen or from the fingertips on the keyboard. were there areas where you found that, yes, this is really easy to create this parallel universe, and then other areas where you were really struggling to fit something in? I mean, how did the whole process work for you?
Yeah, actually two, well-known characters that have significant roles to kind of fit both of those bills. The Moriarty-Holmes relationship was very easy to write because it was two criminal empires against each other that were both trying to stay secretive but take the other one down, and that was so much fun. I mean, I was pulling in unwritten cases or the card scandals of the day, and they were getting tied to one criminal empire or the other. That was a lot of fun, and it was a slow build chapter after chapter until you finally reach the Reichenbach. And I don't want to give any spoilers away to what might happen to Sherlock Holmes at the Reichenbach Falls. But on the complete other end of the spectrum, I wanted to stay really canonical with Irene Adler. Didn't want to make her into his wife or a long lost love or anything like that. She appears in one story and has a strong impact. But man, for the life of me, I rewrote her chapter, I think 3 or 4 different times, just trying to figure out how she could still outsmart Holmes, but not necessarily overpower him. And I would say the Irene Adler chapter was the hardest one to write, but in the end, I was really, really happy with how it turned out.
Excellent.
Our listeners can find the book on Amazon, where you can choose between a Kindle paperback or an audiobook version. And the lovely part about that is you can see the cover layout, and you were wise enough to take that wonderful illustration of Holmes and put it at the center. And so the overall effect of the cover, even with those Strand magazine illustrations, is very sinister. And so, you've really got the hawk-faced version of Holmes there that's so much more true to Conan Doyle's original descriptions.
Yeah, I found what I tried to do with the story and even thinking about the world in general, if you just took one step to the right and looked at everything through just another angle, a lot of things still played out the same, but they just look slightly different. And when I went back through and started looking at all the Strand illustrations as I was reading, especially the pageant ones, as you see Holmes as a criminal, some of those illustrations look very different. He's not sitting in a chair with his arms pulled around his legs solving a problem. He's sitting in a chair with his arms pulled around his legs planning his next crime, or, pulling a gun on Killer Evans has a whole different connotation from, the original story. So.
Yeah, or that one there in the upper left where he's knocking out Teddy Roosevelt. I mean, that's always started.
I cannot see that picture from Solitary Cyclist and not think, why is he punching the president?
For those of you listening at home, that is a shot of Holmes in the public house fighting with roaring Jack Woodley in The Solitary Cyclist. But that is one of the featured images on the cover of The Criminal Mastermind of Baker Street.
Mm. So what's next for the criminal Sherlock Holmes? Are you going to continue this into another book?
No, I think I really painted myself into the corner because I take this story, Chapter 1 is titled Begin at the Beginning, and it is Holmes and Watson meeting at St. Bart's. And the last chapter is Holmes and Watson at the end of his I'm drawing a complete blank on that story.
Oh, his last bow, you mean?
His last bow, yes, thank you, sorry. It's the East Wind Coming line, right at the very end. So unless I try and really pigeonhole some things in, which a few of the reviews I've read pointed out, like, I really like this, but I'm not sure how there will be a sequel. And they made a very valid point. So I think I'll let the criminal Holmes stay where he is, and I'll move on to some other writing projects.
That's fair. That's completely fair. And of course, you do have other writing that you tend to on a regular basis. We've had you as a long time, not long, maybe 3 years. That's okay. That's kind of long. At I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere, And, of course, you recently started your own site called Interesting Though Elementary. What was the inspiration behind that?
It started out as pure publicity for the book. My publisher, MX Publishing, said, "Hey, we think it would be a good idea if you had some kind of blog. You're already on social media, but a blog to get Sherlockian topics out there." And I thought, I don't want to be constantly shilling my book every week because no one's going to come back to read that. But I could sit around and talk about Sherlockians and Sherlockiana all day long. Now I have a blog where I can, do it at will. So I limit myself to once a week, and I just kind of sit down and talk about different topics, different writing projects that I have in the pipeline, or, this past week was the whole conversation, what makes a Sherlockian, what doesn't. I get a couple hundred views each week, which is great. I get, lots of good feedback. It's really just posts on Sherlockiana and how great it is to get out there, because I was definitely one of those Sherlockians. I was happy behind a screen, and I thought I've got Jeremy Brett DVDs and Twitter. I don't really need to go anywhere. And I didn't realize how much there is, how great our hobby is enhanced once you get out there and start meeting other Sherlockians. So, it is kind of almost a love letter to Sherlockians without getting a little too sappy on a regular basis.
I get it. Makes complete sense. And it's very similar to why we do what we do at ihearofsherlock.com. And, it's well done, well written. Obviously, folks,
thank you.
Get a sense as to your style and the things that you're thinking about by going to, your blog. We'll, of course, have a link to that, in the show notes as well. Personally, I have to say it makes me a little sad because it means, you're taking your attention away from writing for us. But hey, we get that. You got to do what you got to do.
Well, if it makes you feel any better, I do feel guilty on a weekly basis.
Okay, that's good.
That's good. There you go.
That's wonderful.
Oh.
We'll get Bert to take my place. He can start posting on iHost now.
Yeah, Bert's very good at contributing here on the podcast, not so much on the website.
No, it's true.
I don't know.
It's true.
Hey, play to your strengths, right?
Exactly.
No, I would love to do it. It's just that there's if I live long enough to retire, I would be happy to spend my days doing Sherlockian writing.
We'll make sure that happens.
I've said over and over again, if I could find a way to become a professional Sherlockian, I would. I mean, I love teaching. That's what I do. But man, if I could just do Sherlockian things 40 hours a week and get paid for it and, have health insurance, I'd be right there.
Yeah. Yeah, the market has not caught up with us yet, unfortunately.
It definitely has not. Never has so much been written by so many for so few. That also goes towards cashing paychecks.
Absolutely. Now, in your Homes in the Heartland event, you mentioned that one Bill Mason was coming down from Nashville. Bill, of course, is the headlight of the Beacon Society. And those of you that have followed the show on a regular basis, you'll know that we, of course, had Shannon Carlisle on recently, who is a Beacon Society award winner. But Rob, you've also taken up, obviously given your profession as a fifth grade school teacher, and in your own kind of Sherlockian interest, you've taken up an interest and an active and leadership role in the Beacon Society. Why don't you tell us about your attraction there and what it is that you're doing?
Yeah, I was lucky enough to get the Jan Stauber grant a couple years ago, and then very lucky enough to be awarded the Beacon Award this past year. And Bill was around for a lot of that, but he has just stepped down this past year, and Denny Dobry is in charge now. And when he took over, he emailed me and said, you're obviously an active Sherlockian teacher. I teach Sherlock Holmes to my fifth graders for a 2-week unit every November. And then, to bring it back to the Great Mouse Detective, that's how we wrap up before Thanksgiving break. But, he said, would you be interested in some kind of leadership role? I said, yeah, whatever, anything I'm capable of doing, I would be happy to help. And he said, we've got the program committee is open. And my first question was, okay, great. What is the program committee? And, we basically kind of receive and review educational related material, and then with approval of the board of directors, put resources on the Beacon Society website for teachers to use, whether they're going to do a whole intensive unit or they're just going to do learning colors for pre-K kids. There's everything from kindergarten to college resources on the Beacon Society webpage, and you don't have to be trying to do win a grant or an award. If you are just looking for lesson plan ideas, the Beacon Society is a really great clearinghouse for things like that. So if you are a teacher, obviously, we would hope that you would check it out. And if you know teachers who even think, a 20 or 15 minute lesson on Sherlock Holmes would be interesting, we definitely want them to check it out. And, we're always looking for people to donate to help support, because the Beacon Society awards grants every year, for many different amounts for teachers who want to purchase books or, some kind of program. Or it's not just teachers, there's a lot of different library programs that have been put on, Sherlock Holmes lock-ins or, things like that. So the Beacon Society is really one of the, it's a group that's really near and dear to my heart, and it's a real blessing that they asked me, and I'm very excited to help out with it.
Yeah. Yeah. So first of all, apologies to Denny Dobry for, being a little forgetful that he is now in the headlight, role. There've been so many changes lately, and I know Bill did a wonderful job while he was there, but I know Denny is going to do an equally as good job. When you've been looking through some of these lesson plans, what are maybe one or two that have stood out to you as a professional educator yourself, as you're reviewing these and putting them up on the website, making them available for people, or looking at them even for future awards, which I know that's the awards committee. But yeah. What are some of the more interesting plans or ideas that the folks have submitted?
Well, I got to tell you, and I know you already mentioned it, but Shannon Carlisle's unit just blew me away with, recreating her whole room, turning it into a 221B and making a museum and, teaching all of that stuff. That's really, really impressive. There's also some really good collegiate level, how to write a Sherlockian paper and examples of Sherlockian papers. There was one, I want to say a high school lesson, and it's actually right on the homepage. When you open up the Beacon Society webpage, it shows a bunch of students with a bloodhound. There's so many different things. It's not just like sit down and see why this guy is trying to kill his daughter with a snake. It's not just read a story. There's so many different ways to include Sherlock Holmes in your classroom. And like I said, young, old, in between, you can adapt it to meet your students' needs.
Well, that's wonderful.
Yeah. Have you, in your awareness of that body of material and in your own teaching, have you, had any issues about the cases of Sherlock Holmes and their being suitable or appropriate to, kids? Have you had to do any editing or selection of, I'm just curious, to what degree the canon is really aligned with current sensibilities.
Different stories are going to meet different needs. I don't think, for my fifth graders, I'm not going to teach them the cardboard box where you're talking about adultery, because that's not there. But the Silver Blaze is applicable enough for them because the murderer is a horse who is just defending themselves. So I think there's 60 different stories, and you can look at them all and say, this one's appropriate, this one's not. And what's great with, these stories being around for so long, so many of them have been rewritten at an easier level for the younger kids. The high school and college students, can easily pick up Doyle's stories. And, you know, if it were up to me, every high school class in America would be reading Hound of the Baskervilles. That is a fantastic book, I think, for that age range. Not for my 11-year-olds. They're not going to get through that. But there are some really good retellings of the stories that kind of condense them, you know, take out some of the things that are a little, you know, do fifth graders need to know what a gasogene is? I mean, I know a lot of adults that don't necessarily know what that is. So the retellings are a real big boon to younger age teachers.
Excellent.
Right. Well, what's next for Rob Nunn?
Well, I have an essay in Chris Redman's next anthology that is scheduled to come out this fall, Sherlock Holmes is Like, where 60 of us are taking the Sherlock Holmes stories and comparing them to other things throughout history or popular culture. And a real big feather in my cap was I was asked to write for one of the upcoming BSI professional series books on education. That's their third one that'll be coming out. I don't know if there's a date set for that, but that is Marino Alvarez and Tim Greer editing that one. And this summer, now that I'm done with all of my other writing commitments, and you know, I'll have some time and I can stay up late and do writing after my wife and daughter go to bed. I'm hoping to get started on a children's book that kind of retells the Sherlock Holmes stories for an age-appropriate group like I just talked about, actually.
Oh, great.
What a slacker.
Yeah, I know. You know, plus running the parallel case and hosting what is hopefully the beginning of a long-running series of weekends, Holmes in the Heartland here in St. Louis.
Well, it's a good thing you have summers off. That's all I can say.
Yeah, that 2 months really does allow for it.
Yeah, that's what we call summer up here in Michigan. So what is Sherlock Holmes like in your essay?
In mine, and I don't know if Chris is going to yell at me for telling it, but I am comparing Sherlock Holmes to Huckleberry Finn.
Oh, really?
And I'll tell you what, I had some ideas, but when I started doing a deep dive, there was a lot more than I could even think of. And I've talked to some of the other contributors and heard of some of theirs, and this is going to be very wide-ranging set of topics.
No doubt.
It'll be nice to have another book that I'm a part of, but I think I'm more interested in reading the other 59 essays than seeing my own name in print.
Well, we'll look forward to that. And I guess that's an excuse for us to have Chris back on the show, too.
Yeah.
It's always a good excuse to talk to Chris Redman.
Yes, indeed. Well, it's been a lovely excuse to talk to you, Rob Nunn. Thank you for being with us, folks. Just as a reminder, you can find Rob's book, The Criminal Mastermind of Baker Street, on Amazon. You can find really all of the things that we talked about. Anything that's got a link, it's in the show notes on this episode of I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere. Rob, thank you for being an enthusiastic and erudite member of the Sherlockian community. We wish you much success moving forward, and we look forward to seeing you in the not-so-distant future.
Thanks a lot. Thanks for having me.
What a lot of fun to talk to Rob and get that other sense. You know, it seems to me that every person we interview brings something new. Well, I suppose as you would expect, but I'm continually amazed by the variety. For example, I had absolutely no idea that there was such a community of Sherlockians in St. Louis. But that is really the great part. You know, the lovely thing about this interest and about these societies all over the world is the community, and being able to get together with people who share these interests is so satisfying. And how interesting his path into Sherlock Holmes. And by the way, that I made a note at the time. Early on in the conversation, Rob mentioned The Revenge of the Hound.
Yes.
And that book wasn't written by Michael Harrison. It was written by Michael Hardwick. Every so often.
Oh, Hardwick, Harrison.
Yeah, we sort of confuse the two.
Yeah.
But that's sure somebody out there has probably already sent us an email about this. But that was Michael Hardwick.
Before the show even aired, they probably sent us an email on that. You're right. Yeah. No, good call on that. That's an important distinction. It was Michael Harrison who wrote Sherlock Holmes, My Life and Crimes, and Sherlock.
No. Michael Hardwick wrote Sherlock Holmes, My Life and Crimes.
Hang on. It's all the way across the room on my bookshelves here. So here's that. Okay, here it is. Sherlock Holmes was Harrison. That's
nice.
What I was looking at. And see, it's right next to my copy of Sherlock Holmes, My Life and Crimes. So, my bad.
Michael and his late wife, Molly, Michael and Molly Hardwick also did.
Yes.
They did the Sherlock Holmes Companion, didn't they?
Yes, they did. They did indeed.
Yeah.
So, important distinction there. Well, one other thing I want to point out about Rob and his experience, he's a little younger than we are and is newer to the Sherlockian movement. And I think this goes back to, as he said, his recent essay about being a Sherlockian, what it takes to be a Sherlockian. There are some folks who believe you absolutely must read the canon in order to be considered a Sherlockian. There are others who come down just as hard on the other side. No, all you need is to like Sherlock Holmes. Whatever you want to believe, I think it's this character, this enduring character, the works of Sir Arthur Conan Doyle that have brought us all together. And Rob is the perfect example of someone like the Baker Street Babes when they were first on the scene, new to this movement, certainly no less fervent in their desire to connect, to talk about these things, to share experiences. And, Rob is probably one of the, I would say, newest Sherlockians that we have had on the show. He hasn't been at this for a heck of a long time, but he's still done some interesting things. And that's all we want in the Sherlockian community. We just want to connect with other interesting people. And Rob really personifies that in his variety of activities and his interests. So we're fortunate to have someone like him in our midst.
Yes, no, absolutely. And people tend to lose sight of the fact that for most of the time that Sherlock Holmes, has existed from the 1880s through, say, the 1950s and the 1960s, there were really only three ways to connect to Sherlock Holmes. One was to read the canon, the second way was to see a movie, and the third was to listen to the radio. And I'm sure there were people who were mesmerized by the radio programs, and that was their entry in. And I'm sure there were people who were fascinated by the Rathbone and Bruce films and, maybe only lightly delved into the canon. But since then, there are so many avenues and so much. I mean, before you even get to social media, so many different ways. And, Rob mentioned the Robert Downey Jr. films. And, say what you will. I mean, there are people who love those films and there are people who hate them. But the lovely part about it is that those and Elementary and the BBC Sherlock have brought Sherlock Holmes to literally tens, if not hundreds of millions of people around the world.
And we are forever grateful. Well, it is that time, once again, to get ourselves prepared for the canonical couplets. We've had some participation over the last few episodes that has caused us to rethink how we are running the program. We used to say that if you were the first one in with the correct response, you would win a prize from the archives, from the vaults here at IHO's headquarters. However, a couple of folks wrote to us and they said, hey, not everyone gets to listen to the show at the same time after it's been released. There's some folks who, perhaps like Rob are waiting by their Victrolas for the next episode to come out. There are others who maybe have it queued up in their cars. Other folks who wait till they go maybe on a road trip or till they have some quiet time to sit down at their desks and listen. And because of that, we decided to, as I said, recalibrate how it is we are selecting the winners. So, because we have had such great interest and because folks have been actively participating, we are going to go with the random selection of all correct answers that are submitted. So if you want to participate in this, please be patient. We will put all the names in the revolving drum. We will rotate it up and down the street. Whether or not we stand on top of that drum while it rotates is another story. But when it comes to a complete and full stop, we will then reach into the drum, pull out the winning name, and let you know who it is won that week. So our last winner, when we read the Canonical Couplet, actors and journalists, this story states, can bring to begging certain basic traits. The winner was Tony Shar, who correctly answered The Man with the Twisted Lip. So congratulations, Tony. There is a Sherlockian keepsake on its way to you as we speak.
Oh, excellent. Well, I think that's a very good strategy and change in the process, but I really think that what we should do is just print out and then cut up all of the winning answers and put them into Henry Baker's hat and then pick one.
That's a big hat. I mean, it could serve the same purpose as a drum.
No, that's true.
Well, speaking of drum, let's fire up those kettle drums, shall we? Ah, there they are. Well, that means one thing. It's time for this episode's version of the Canonical Couplet. And here we go. By this, we're taught the all-important truth that brothers seldom share a single tooth. If you think you know the answer to this Canonical Couplet, what story it is taken from or that it represents, let us know in an email. Just email us at comment@ihearofsherlock.com with Canonical Couplet in the subject line. Let us know what you think, and we will select that random winner from you. Well, I guess we're kind of at the end of our tether once again.
Oh, how nice to see the end of the old tether again. A little red ribbon at the end waving in the breeze. Yeah. It's so comforting.
Yeah. Well, and this episode, of course, released on Tax Day. Oh, in the United States, April 15th. Forgot about that.
Well, it's not really. I think this year, since it's on a Sunday, your taxes aren't due until Tuesday. So why don't we just release this episode on the Tuesday then?
I'm okay with that. Yeah. I'm okay with that. But coming up in the next few weeks, there's Sherlockian spring meetings all over the place. You're probably headed up to Philadelphia or down to Philadelphia or over to Philadelphia, however you get there.
I wish. No, I've got to miss the Sons of the Copper Beaches this year. My wife has a gala that I must accompany her to.
Well,
bad timing.
I hope you choose an appropriate gown.
Yes, something off the shoulder. But April 22nd will be a joint meeting of the Cornish Horrors and the Men on the Tour in Connecticut. So I'll represent your interests up there. And
please do.
Many other things. And then there's the Speckled Band in May.
Yes, looking forward to that. The first coeducational meeting of the Speckled Band in its history. So that should be something very impressive. We'll certainly come back all full of steak and kidney pie and tales to tell.
Excellent.
Well, until the next time, I remain the steak.
Well, I must be the kidney.
Oh.
And how appropriate.
Indeed. I guess I'm Scott Monty.
Oh, well, and I'm Pie-Faced Burt Wolder.
The game's afoot.
I'm afraid that in the pleasure of this conversation, I am neglecting business of importance, which awaits me elsewhere.
Thank you for listening. Please be sure to join us again for the next episode of I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere, the first podcast dedicated to Sherlock Holmes.
Goodbye, and good luck, and believe me to be, my dear fellow, very sincerely yours, Sherlock Holmes.
You still with us?
Yes, I'm still. Actually, we have a